Okay, good evening and welcome everybody to the Fish and Wildlife Board meeting of April 24th, 2024. My name is Brad Froll and I'm chair of the board. And the first thing I'd like to do is have all board members introduce themselves and identify which county they represent. And we'll start over here with Allison.
Allison Frazier, Chittenden County.
Brian Bailey, Washington County.
Bob Patterson, Addison County.
Brad Ferland, Caledonia County.
Nicholas Burnham, Windsor County.
Jamie Dragon, Loyal County.
Online,
Paul Noel, Orleans County.
Jay Sweeney, Franklin County.
okay, thank you.
On the phone, Michael Bancroft, Orange County.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, thank you, board members. Commissioner, if you could introduce yourself and your staff that's present.
Sure. Good evening. I'm Christopher Herrick. I'm the commissioner of the department. And I can't really see who else is there, so I'll just ask, starting with Abigail, that folks introduce themselves.
Assistant Commissioner.
John Austin, Director of Wildlife. Nick Fortin, Deer and Moose Project Leader.
John Fowler, Major for the Warden Service.
Thank you. I don't know if there are any staff online. No, okay. I see David Dean. Could you introduce yourself, please, as board member?
David Dean, Windham County.
Thank you. Welcome, Dave. Okay, thank you, Commissioner, for you and your staff. First item on the agenda tonight is the approval of the minutes from April 10th, 2024.
I would move that we approve those minutes.
Okay, I have a motion. And I have a second. Any other comments? Any comments on the minutes as presented? Hearing none. All those in favor of the minutes as presented signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you. And next item on the agenda is public comments. Rob? And I'm not sure.
Get up here.
Right there's perfect. Yeah, I think we should be able to see you there.
Good evening, everybody online and here. As always, I appreciate this opportunity. I'd like to speak briefly to 258 as we get near the end of a legislative session. And I've been listening, really trying to listen to the issues that people have who are opposed to 258. I think they're legitimate. And I see it as a work that we need to do to move forward. And regardless of 258, I've been encouraged by conversations I've been having with staff members. John Austin, I want to name you in particular. You made a really strong effort to be inclusive, and I acknowledge that and I appreciate that. And I just look forward to the opportunity of working with the board in the future. I've invited Michael Bancroft out to my place, Sage Mountain Botanical Sanctuary, where I work, so you can see the work we do in outdoor education to kind of get an idea of how much work that we do that aligns with the board and the department. And I'd like to extend that invitation to all board members. So yeah, I'll be sending that out to an email. Anybody can stop by where I live in Orange. And also even next month, we're going to be installing a flow device in our wetlands. So I'd like to let you guys know about that in case you want to come out and check out that too. Skip Lyle's going to do that. But otherwise, I just want to appreciate the spirit of inclusiveness, especially from the commissioner. Also, we've had many conversations the last year, and the professionalism I've experienced from the department and the board is much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody online would like to take advantage of the 2 minutes for public comments? If so, please raise your hand or give us some indication. Okay, seeing nobody at this point, thank you. So the next and final item on the agenda at this point is the 2024 antlerless deer permits and youth season. Preliminary approval. And Commissioner, I don't know if you want to introduce this or if we just want to go to Nick. That's up to you.
No, well, thanks for that opportunity. No, Nick is there, I presume.
He is.
So
Yep.
I'll just turn it over to him. He's the subject matter
Okay.
expert.
Great. Welcome, Nick.
Get this pulled up. So this is roughly a half-hour presentation. Going to cover both, obviously the recommendation, but also want to cover a little bit of kind of deer biology 101, if you will. Mainly to get at, provide some perspective on like the numbers of antlerless deer we should be thinking about and what we're recommending, where that falls in the bigger context of what we could and or should perhaps be doing. So to get into that, some of this, those of you all were here last year, I think, represented some of this last year. I'm going to build on it a little bit. But so just first a look at how productive deer are. These are pregnancy rates by age class. So obviously all female deer, but adults are any deer that's 2 years old or older. Yearling is a deer that bred at 1.5 years old, fawns less than 1 year old. You can see once they're 1 year old, 90+% of our does are pregnant, and even 5% of our fawns are breeding at about 7 months old. Fecundity, which is if they're pregnant, how many fawns do they have? See, adults are more productive than yearlings, which are usual first-time breeders. But even yearlings, about half of them are producing twins. Half have a single, half have twins. And oddly, even fawns, if they conceive, about 1/4 of them are producing twins. Research tells us that if a fawn gives birth, so gives birth at 1 year old, 2 fawns, they almost never survive. Just doesn't know how to be a parent yet, sort of thing. But nonetheless, something. But so what this works out to is a birth rate, which is, so this is like what we use in our models. This is what you might see. Of course, a lot of fawns die before you have a chance to see them, but this is the number of fawns that actually hit the ground per all the deer out there, all the does out there in the spring. 1.76 for adult does is pretty decent, actually. 1.35 for yearlings is not great. Get into that. And then, of course, most of our fawns just, really what it is we have winters and fawns need to be 7 to 8 months old to breed, which for us would fall in like mid-December or later. Typically winter has set in by then, so they don't get to breed before they're focused on surviving. This year, who knows, we might have had more fawns breed. The point is very high reproductive rates for a relatively large animal. Just to show more detailed data of how this works, this is age at the bottom. We have collected deer for many, many years. Some of them get very old, but as you can see, productivity peaks around 2 to 3 years old, and it stays pretty steady until about 12 years old, basically until they're teenagers. And then it drops off. We don't have a ton of deer that make it into their teens, but every year we age a few that are in their teens. They're old grannies at that point. They're not productive. Also an indication that we're not over harvesting our does when we get deer that make it into their teens. So what does this translate to when we're looking at a deer population and how a deer population can grow or reproduce? So if we start with a population of 100 does, typical breakdown in Vermont is about 25 of those, 25% of our population is 1.5 year old does. The rest are older. That population would produce 165 fawns. What would hit the ground in early spring and early summer, early June. 165 fawns, about half of those survive to the fall. Most of those will be killed by predators. That is not a big deal. If there weren't any predators, half of them would die anyway of something else. Doesn't really matter what kills them. The fact is only half of them are going to survive to fall. Part of why deer have so many offspring is because half of them are sacrificial. And then about 50 of those will make it to a year old. So roughly 70% of what survives the summer will survive the winter hunting season in the winter and make it to a year old. You may notice those 50 fawns, half are male, half are female. Take those 25 female fawns and you pop them into your population. That's your 25 yearlings, right? The next year. But in order to keep the population from growing, we're going to add 25 female fawns into that doe population. In order to keep it from growing, when you add those back, you need to remove 25 of your does. You have to make room for those 25 female fawns to come in. Otherwise, if 25 of your does don't die from something, population is going to grow, right? If more than 25 die, you're not going to quite keep up, population would decline. So what this tells us, and this is roughly what we see in our population, about 25% of our doe population needs to die every year for our population to be stable. That's dying from all causes, not just hunting. This is your average year. This is how we get currently to 25%. Hunting accounts for roughly 8% of our total doe mortality. Non-hunting, which is everything else, is on average about 17%. The non-hunting part varies a lot from year to year, mainly depending how severe the winter is. The reason we don't break this down further is because, one, we don't have enough detailed data to go. I don't know how many deer die from predation or vehicle accidents or all the myriad causes they can die from. What we do know is the total, and we know that in a hard winter, non-hunting mortality goes up. Turns out pretty much every cause of non-hunting mortality goes up in a hard winter. Roadkills increase in a hard winter. Predation is actually how most deer die nowadays. They don't starve anymore. But that increases in a hard winter. It's much lower in an easy winter. So it's still very much tied to winter severity, but it's all the different causes that are increasing. So that's how we get on an average year to 25%. But like I said, this can vary a lot. Average non-hunting mortality, quote unquote, is 17%. A severe winter, we can have 25% or more in some zones. So in a severe winter, we could kill no female deer through hunting. Population would still not increase. In fact, they might decline in some units. Some parts of the state, like the Champlain Valley, never have a hard enough winter to do that. But like Essex County, most years, probably average is about 25% non-hunting mortality. That's why we basically haven't killed those there in 20-something years. And the population's been stable. In an easy winter, this past winter, non-hunting mortality estimated to be about 7%. Long way from average, which is what we plan on. So to translate this to how many does we should be harvesting statewide, if we look at this. This is our average. If we're trying to hit that 8% mark, depending how big our population is, right? Our population does fluctuate somewhat. But given the range of variability in our population over the past 20 years or so, 8% translates to somewhere between 4,900 and 6,000 adult does. Antlerless deer, adult does. So 6,000 adult does would probably translate to about 7,500, maybe a little more, total antlerless deer harvest. This past fall, we killed 7,000 total antlerless deer, about 5,300, I think, 5,700 adult does. So we were trying to be near the upper end of that. We didn't quite make the size we wanted, but we can do that. We can work within this range. We have the tools, given average winters, for variation on both sides that makes it average. We can kill those numbers of deer and manage our deer population. Problem is that when we string a few easy winters together and we need to start thinking about harvest mortality that's somewhere around 15%. I'm not talking just this year, but even to get to 15% from harvest, meaning our non-hunting was like 10%, 9,000 to over 11,000 adult does. That's probably talking 11,000 to 13,000 plus antlerless deer. We killed 7,000 antlerless deer last year. The proposal you have in front of you calls for what, about 8,700? That is probably as many as we can kill under our current. Doubt we could actually do. I'll get into that. But so this is more building toward conversations we might have next winter when we start talking regulation changes, but we need tools to allow us to get to those numbers. We can't under our system. Or we got to start praying for harder winters. We need to work in that average range. Part of the reason we can't get any higher than really where we're at or proposing this year, I know you've all seen this before, antlerless permit fill rates are down around 14%. It's actually like 13.7% on average last year. We tried to bump this up with that October antlerless muzzleloader season. It hasn't changed the fill rate at all. Spread the harvest out. We're taking 1,000 or so does 6 weeks earlier, which is a good thing. More hunting opportunity, which is a good thing, but it has not increased our fill rate. And that low fill rate means we need to issue very high numbers of permits. I'll get into this a bit more, but essentially at this point, more permits than we have hunters. So getting into this year's recommendation, you all know we have deer density objectives for every wildlife management unit. Setting our big game plan. These are the densities, deer per square mile, that we believe, based on all the evidence we have and all the literature out there, that should be sustainable. Meaning our habitat should be able to support this density of deer long term. More importantly, we have physical condition thresholds, not objectives, but like a minimum threshold. When physical condition drops below these, we know we can sustain higher numbers than these thresholds, than these levels we have before. If physical condition drops below these levels, that's an indication to us that deer have exceeded carrying capacity. In addition to the health of deer, we also, look at things like impacts to forest health, forest, tree regeneration, wildflower abundance, various things we might look at, just deer impacts on the plants themselves. This is actually, we got a lot more data on deer, and it's more objective to measure the health of the deer. So this is our best indicator of whether we have too many deer or not. And overall, we don't manage statewide, but if we average everything out, overall, we're not doing great on physical condition. Yearling antler beam diameters have been declining steadily for 30 years. I thought we were starting to see some improvement. In fact, I honestly believe we were seeing some improvement in the last couple of years. And then this past year, we had terrible beam diameters, body weights too. And interestingly, we actually saw that in our birth rates year before. 2023, same thing. So for whatever reason, a bad year, but it's an indication that we have too many deer. Can't sustain higher numbers. So part of the reason for that, our population is well above projected, and trending in the wrong direction. So when we were doing well, when we were starting to make progress from 2018, which is, see if you can see my cursor, this high point, 2018, we had a fluke year, killed a lot of antlerless deer during muzzleloader season, also had a hard winter that year, 18 to 19. That caused population decline. 2020, of course, was the pandemic and new hunting regulations. We actually, that's our highest antlerless harvest since 1981 or something. We killed over 9,000 antlerless deer in 2020. That caused a population decline, even with an average winter. We sort of overcorrected in 2021 given what we'd seen in 2020 and some uncertainty about whether that would carry on beyond 2020. We were a little too conservative in 2021, which is that low point in the population. That allowed the deer numbers to start increasing. And then we've done better on antlerless harvest the last 2 years, but again, we plan on an average winter. And we have had 2 very easy winters in a row. In fact, the last 5 winters have been below average. But the last 2 have been very, very much below average. And as you can see, we all know climate change is a thing, but long-term trend, downward trend in winter severity. Probably the bigger issue recently is just we've had 1 severe winter in the last 8 years. That, looking back, you can see those were much more frequent. Those knock our population back every time, and then it takes a few years to recover. When we don't have those, we have to make up the difference through hunting, and that's where we have to get that higher percentage of total mortality through hunting. When we have stretches like this, we all know these are going to be more common going forward. So just to show, not only did we have an easy winter on average, every part of the state had an easy. These are, I think, I'm not going to say they're record lows everywhere, but I mean, even up in the Northeast Kingdom, Essex County, in the teens winter severity, that's unheard of up there. I think Averill, there was weather station in Averill, they had 1 snow winter severity point. The snow only hit 18 inches once. Normal winter, they have 4 feet of snow for 3 months. So ridiculously easy winter statewide, well below average. And that's going to cause an increase in deer numbers. So our most accurate estimates for deer numbers are looking back at last fall. So that's the map on the left, 2023. We project that forward based on how many deer hunters harvested and the winter severity to try to estimate 2024. You can see there's nothing dramatically different, but every unit or almost every unit is up 1 to 2 deer per square mile. And it does broad scale, more deer. Importantly, we are well above objective, or above objective pretty much everywhere, well above objective in many WMUs, which gets us to our quote unquote objective, management objective for this year, which is decrease in all the areas in red, stabilize in all the areas in yellow. I don't love this map because this is really just a bit of semantics, whether we call it decrease or stabilize. You know, some of the Connecticut River Valley units, for example, our current estimate is 17 deer per square mile. The goal is 50. It's stabilized because that's within our margin of error, plus or minus 2 deer per square mile. We're not, 100% sure that our estimates are perfect. I know they're not perfect. We're not, we have that level of error. So because it's within 2, it's called stabilized. But the reality is I'm trying to get from 17 to 50 with that permit out. So we are trying to bring it down a little bit, but it's a relatively minor change that we may not even be able to detect, honestly, given how accurately we are able to estimate deer numbers. So don't get stuck on this. The reality is we're trying to get to our goals everywhere, regardless of what the objective is. I want to touch on a couple WMUs. If anyone has questions on one that I don't touch on, have that slide somewhere up. I'm happy to answer those. But I want to touch on some of the ones that the more dramatic changes, I guess I'd say. Well, first one is WMUC. So this is a unit. You can see the upper left is the deer density estimates over time. We had been within that threshold, right, of plus or minus 2 deer per square mile of our goal, but consistently above it for a long time. And the last couple of years, a noticeable uptick. I don't know if it'll actually get to 21 this year, but the point is it's well above objective. Nothing we've done in the past has brought it down to objective. So we need to increase our antlerless harvest. So we're bumping up to 1,000 permits. That's a record for this unit. And that should get our antlerless harvest up where we want it to be. And you also notice, well, physical condition is not great in this unit. It's not terrible, but it's right around the minimum thresholds. But the buck harvest, upper right here, the green line, has been steadily increasing for the past 10 years. Part of that is spike horns became legal in 2020, but nonetheless, still an increasing trend in the buck harvest. Population is almost certainly increasing. We need to do something to stop that. D1, similar in a way, but different reasons. D1 has just been consistently above objective for the past 10 years. Physical condition is not good in this unit. And again, none of the antlerless harvests we've had in the past 10 years have actually caused the population to decline. So we need to increase it. So we're bumping up to 1,800 permits in this unit. That is a record for this unit.
So can you, what is your percentage harvest rate from that? Does that tell us any place? So of that 1810, what is your objective? 30% of that and 20% of that?
1,800 permits. I think it's in one of the tables in there. The typical success rates might be.
Well, it is. It shows, yeah, I've got like a D1 is, well, 22% last year.
Yeah.
So, I was just curious, what is your objective here with 810 to hit that 22% again, or anything higher than that?
Yeah, so the total antlerless harvest at 810, well, the muzzleloader, the way to read this is 1,800 permits expecting to kill 352 deer with muzzleloaders. So that's roughly that 22%. It's probably 20%. Which is actually our highest fill rate in any decade. So we can still kill deer in this unit. We've just historically been very conservative because it has historically had harder winters. We clearly have not been aggressive enough, though. We need to kill. E, I want to throw up here because I'm recommending permits. 200 total, but it's 100 each in E1 and E2. We have not issued permits in antlerless permits in WMUE since 2000. But your numbers are increasing. As I just said, we just had a completely unprecedented winter in that part of the state. And we need to stop deer numbers from increasing if we want to maintain our moose population in that part of the state. We allow deer numbers to increase, we're going to increase the prevalence of brainworm. And that could have an effect on our moose population that takes years to recover from. So we want to stop our deer population from increasing in this unit. So we're going to issue some permits. It's not going to kill a ton of deer, but it'll help. The other reality is, some point not too distant future, we are going to have a real winter again in E. Might be the only place we have it, but we will have winters here. So it will knock them down, but we don't want to let them get above pretty close to 10, honestly, deer per square mile for any period of time. You notice if you ever need evidence that low density deer populations are in excellent physical condition, E, just phenomenal physical condition. If you compare that to any other part of the state, deer is so much bigger, so much more productive. I mean, you're talking that's more productive than Champlain Valley deer that live in farmland. Density has a big influence on that. And the last one I do want to touch on quick here is O. So I sort of mentioned this earlier. This is similar to J2. They're kind of in that same boat, but you see the density projection is right at 17 deer per square mile. In fact, I think in O, J2, maybe H and J1 as well, the estimate projection for this coming year is like 17.2, whatever. It rounded to 17, but in reality, they're all right at that upper threshold. We're trying to knock the population back to the objective. And in all of these units, well, less so in O, but their physical condition is borderline, right? They're not terrible, but they're all right around that minimum threshold. We don't want the population to increase. We have to kill more antlerless deer to do that. So I bumped O up to 2,300 permits. That is the most permits we've ever distributed in O. Actually distributed. We tried to give away more. I think it was 2018. That was the number we actually sold. I'll be shocked if these all sell this year. So The specific recommendation this year, there are 3 parts to it, as most of you know at this point. First is archery season is open to antlers harvest in all WMUs statewide. It's been that way for several years. Nothing new there. The youth novice season will be open to 1 deer of either sex, including any buck, meaning no antler restrictions statewide. Yeah, all done. So statewide. That's the same that season has always been. And then the last part, the part we do talk about more, because we change every year. 28,300 antlerless permits distributed as shown on the map and as you have in the packet, in the invitation. We cannot sell 28,300. We don't have that many orders. Even with some people buying 2, we won't sell. I don't think we've ever sold. I think we might have hit 25,000 once. I think we sold 24,000 something in 2018. We will have thousands of leftover permits this year. Specifically, I will also add, there are some units I did increase permit numbers. The ones in red here, A, F1, K, and N, they have the same permit allocation as last year because we didn't sell all permits last year. We should be issuing more permits. We should probably be doubling the antlerless harvest in all 4 of those units. Maybe not doubling in K and N, but increasing dramatically. But we can't. We can't sell more permits. So I didn't change the allocation because there was no point to it. We will not sell all the permits again in those units. And then the ones in orange, I did increase the allocation this year, and I suspect we will not sell out any of those units either. We might, but I would guess we will. I wouldn't be shocked if there are a couple others that we don't sell. You know, B, we've always been able to get rid of all of our permits. I upped it this year to 6,000, but we're also, part that sort of makes this complicated is we're also issuing more permits in C and more permits in G. So there are a lot of hunters that are going to get a permit where they actually want to hunt in C or G and stay there instead of buying a B permit, which they would have done in the past. So that's going to detract from B. All these things kind of, you know, all works as one in the grand scheme of things. So we're gonna max out essentially. There's a little room for growth potentially in the green areas if we need to in the future, but much. Like I said, we have just over 30,000 licensed muzzleloader hunters. That includes all permanent license holders. You know, so yeah, no chance we can get rid of all these. Then last thing here, just so we're all on the same page with the process, presentation tonight and preliminary straw vote approval. This is basically what are we going to present to the public for comment. We have 2 public hearings scheduled on May 6th at Rutland High School and May 8th at Thetford Academy. And then as usual, there'll be a pre-recorded version of the presentation I'll give at those 2 hearings. That'll be on the website and people can leave comments by email or by contacting any of us. That's our public comment email. And then the final vote, the unofficial vote, will be on May 15th at our next board meeting. So with that, I guess I'll take any questions. If anyone has some questions.
Got one, Nick. I'm sure this could be easily an hour-long topic of conversation on itself, but can you just remind me the top bullet points of how you get population estimates?
Yeah. So I think the key things are we use several different models. So there's no one like fancy complex way. But the 2, I would say, I'll say most reliable ones. One is basically harvest based, right? And mostly buck harvest based. So over time, we've been able to figure out like typically harvest whatever it is, 40% of the bucks in a given area in a given year. So we know if they kill 100 here, but you know, they kill a certain number of deer, that translates to there were this many, certain number out there. And we also can figure out things like sex ratio and fawn doe ratio from age structure, from observation data. So you can kind of build back, right? You take your harvest, that tells you how many bucks you had out there, the number of your sex ratio, buck to doe ratio, and then calculate your doe population. And if you know your doe to fawn ratio, which showed the birth rate stuff earlier, so we have a good sense of that, tells us how many fawns you add those all together. Populations. The other way we do it, and because we've been collecting a lot more age data in the past about 8 years now, I'm liking this model a lot more. It's very reliable. It's hard to refute any of it. We know those deer were alive. Is a reconstruction model. So taking a deer that's killed, you know, this year that's 4 years old, I know that deer wasn't alive last year. So building back, reconstructing like that. Again, a very reliable way to get at deer. So we have actually fantastic data on this. And I guess the other piece I would say is, I mean, I think our models are really good. I think they're probably some of the most accurate deer population models any state has. For a very small state, we actually collect a lot of data. Yeah, all relative, but so we have fairly accurate models. But really, what I care about most is that we can predict the trend, getting the trend right. I don't necessarily care if there are actually 16 deer per square mile and I tell you there's 18. But I care if it's going up or going down, right? And I think we predict that very well. So that's kind of what we focus on. And then again, the physical condition stuff, the health of those deer matters way more than the density. So if we know the physical condition's not good, we have too many deer. Doesn't matter if it's 20 deer per square mile or 12 deer per square mile, you have too many deer. The goal needs to be reduced.
Are you worried about less, if there's fewer physical check-in stations, our ability to monitor those physical conditions of the deer being harvested?
Not yet. So the physical condition data that I show is all collected from our biologists, staff at the check station. So when someone checks their deer in normally and they weigh it, that's for their own benefit. I do not use those weights. I don't trust you to weigh your own deer. I don't trust the scale to be accurate, and I don't trust you to tell me if it's fully fit. All that. So all the weight, all the beam diameter stuff, that's from our staff actually at the station. And we've been able to get plenty of that. The biggest challenge we're coming up against lately is our youth weekend harvest being so low, and that's when we collect most of that data. And so we're struggling a little bit in some units to get enough information just because there aren't enough deer killed on youth weekend. Not because we lack check stations. The lacking check stations is an issue for hunters, just convenience for hunters. And we're unfortunately continuing to lose those stations, especially in some areas.
Thanks.
Seems like I mean, I know the whole approach to managing all our wildlife is more, it's a long-term, the long view, the long game. But there are things that happen in a very short period of time that can have long-term implications, where sometimes the response needs to be more immediate than just the long-term plan. And it sounds like we're maybe not there yet, but I think we're moving in that direction with our deer herd possibly. And so what do other states do to take immediate steps to address the fact that we've had multiple easy winters in a row? And how do they have an immediate impact?
I mean, that's a great question. I don't know that any state has the capability to dramatically change their antlerless harvest from year to year. Some have certainly more capacity to increase it than we currently do, given our regulations. But I would probably sooner argue that most states are challenged essentially with the same problem. They can't kill enough antlerless deer. There are a lot of hurdles to that. Sometimes it's you know, in our case, we've put our own restrictions on who can kill antlerless deer and when, and that's kind of handcuffing us. Other states, they have to kill so many that they just don't have the hunters. Sometimes there's political pressure that keeps it from happening. There are a lot of reasons, but I would say most states are pretty much in the same boat we're in. This is a very common problem. It's a major topic of discussion at our Northeast Deer Check meeting every year. How do we kill enough deer?
Yeah. Go ahead.
At the public hearings that we went to earlier, comment that I heard come up quite often is one that I brought up myself, is the possibility of harvesting antlerless deer during the regular races. It's been very controversial. The reason I'm not necessarily, I don't know myself, but would it be possible to experiment with that in the FAMUs that have, you can't possibly fill all the, can't sell all the bags? Would it be possible to experiment with that and allow hunters during the regular rifle season to buy tags?
So I think we're getting into conversations we'll hopefully have next winter about regulation changes. But yeah, I mean, all that stuff's on the table. Like, we should be considering all options. Like, that is an obvious one that we will be.
So I think it would drastically help.
Yeah, I mean, I think we you know, like I said, we don't have enough muzzleloader hunters to continue managing through muzzleloading. So yeah, we're gonna have to look at allowing anyone to get out.
At least in some of the.
Yeah, there's lots of different ways we can look at that, but yeah, that's something we're gonna be discussing.
David Dean and then Paul.
All right, thank you. Could you go back to the density slide that you showed early on in your presentation? And it's about area O. So I continue to hear, I think you've just, yeah, that's it. No, back, back one. Other way, I guess. It's the one with the map of Vermont and it shows area O, and the density objective for area O, as I read this, is 15. Now I continue to hear from, and the department heard from citizens at the public hearing down in Brattleboro that we have a problem with overbrowse. And it is, in fact, in the opinion of some foresters, taking out our maple forest because the other stuff the deer don't like. Why is the density objective as high as it is, 15 for O, when right next to it, M, which used to be part of O, is at 12 as a density objective? And then coming to the end of your presentation, and I'm sorry, I may not have heard it all, but you don't think that we can sell enough licenses to reach the current objective for O? And I'd like you to repeat that discussion a little bit. So why 15, not 12 for O as a density objective? And then the barriers that you see to getting to that lower deer population. Thank you.
Yep. So the reason O is at 15 is because that should be sustainable in O. The reason it's different from M is O has more farmland. It's lower elevation, easier winters, more open land, so more feed for deer. So it should be able to sustain a higher density of deer than M. 15.
Yeah, but according to certain foresters, they're supporting themselves changing the makeup of our forest away from what we want.
So the issue in O and I think 15 is still a good objective. The problem in O is we've been above that for a long time. And this slide only goes back 10 years, but before that, it was consistently above 15. And it looks like we've been close to there overall. And I actually think I would argue that we have. Deer numbers, O is a challenging unit. Deer numbers vary quite a bit as you go up the river or down the river, whichever way you want to go. Honestly, from town to town, one town can have very high deer numbers. The next town may have lower deer numbers. And so you're going to have areas within this unit that have much more than 15 deer per square mile. And that's where you're going to see problems. We're managing at a broad scale here. And so we're averaging everything out. You have areas in this unit that undoubtedly have 20 deer per square mile. You have areas in this unit that probably are closer to 12 or 10 deer per square mile. We have to think big picture. The reality is, I agree with you, David, that there are too many deer in parts of O. And that's part of why we're upping the antlerless permit numbers, is to try to hold that population down lower. I don't know that there's a number where you completely eliminate those pockets of higher deer density, because there's such limited access in a lot of those places. So again, I think I still believe 15 is sustainable, and we'd see a lot of improvement in forest health and deer conditioning if we can stay at or even below 15. The problem is we've been hovering at or above 15 for far too long. So that's why it is what it is. I'm not saying we're not there. We're not at objective. So we can't be judging the current condition of the forest or the deer based on, we're not at objective. So things should improve if we can get to objective. If we get there and they don't improve, then we'll change our objective.
Thank you.
All well?
Yeah, Nick, I'm assuming that the WMUs that have APR and those do not, they're going to remain the same for this coming deer season.
Yeah, we don't have, so that would require a rule change to actually change which WMUs have or don't have an antler restriction. So we're not changing that. That's going to stay the same. So in terms of D1, which it's probably your interest,
Yeah.
that's not going to change. It's still not going to have an antler restriction. What I am going to push for is some outreach to hunters in that unit to let them know our concern and hopefully get them to maybe consider passing a little more than they have in the past or would have otherwise.
Yeah, I like that idea. I just want to make another comment on every year I'm impressed with the level of detail you give us on each WMU. It's quite impressive and remarkable. And I appreciate that effort, and I'm sure other board members do too.
Thanks, Paul.
How do you or can you factor in the I guess the quality of the habitat and the the availability of habitat for your models, for your population objectives?
I would say it is largely subjective. So what we are really looking at, or what we did look at when we set those objectives, is what was our estimated deer, or what has been our estimated deer, density in the past. And by WMU, we're only able to look back so far. We haven't been able to do it at that small scale or estimate at that small scale for all that long. But basically, we look back at that. All right, where has our deer density been over the past 10 years, and what does our physical condition look like? If you're in good shape at the density they were at, then yeah, okay, that density is okay. If they weren't, we set the objective lower than where it had been. And we worked in, may have noticed, these are in increments of 3 deer per square mile, 12, 15, or 18, the exception of E, which is a whole different thing. But again, that gets into that margin of error. Like we could have probably gotten real precise and had like, this one's going to be 14, this one's going to be 15, this one's going to be 13. But can't estimate that accurately, and quite frankly, we'd be just pulling numbers out. So we put it basically into these 3 categories, 12, 15, and 18. And 18 is a hard cap. Research has shown very clearly that even in places with a lot of agriculture, you get above 18 deer per square mile and your forest just get decimated. So 18 is a hard cap, and that's why that's our highest. And then we step down from there, looking at where our deer were and what shape they were in.
So with that said, so if 18 is a hard cap, and here's something that's bumping up against that, are there other forms of wildlife that are competing for the same feed, the same habitat that are, you know, that are equally important to conservation?
In most cases, not really. Certainly in E, moose are something we're considering, more for the impact of brainworm on moose than them actually competing for browse. But that's anywhere moose exists. I mean, they're eating largely the same food, right? And one moose is like 5 deer. So you're going to have moose. You do have to kind of take that out of your deer equation. In most of the state, we don't have enough moose to where that really factors in. A lot of hunters would like to tell you that turkeys compete with deer. They do not in any way, shape, or form. Turkeys make a mess when they feed, but deer are like a nice little vacuum cleaner, and they eat 10 times or more as much acorns than turkeys do. They're not really competing. So no, I mean, we're basically focused on deer for this. But you know, the forest health side of it, this is all about deer health because that's what we can measure. Maintaining healthy forests benefits the full array of species we have in the state, right? That's part of why we want to keep our forests healthy and have an appropriate deer population.
Any other questions for Nick? Paul, Joel?
Yeah, I just want to share a story. Yesterday, I was out turkey scouting, and a deer came by me at a pretty good clip. Looked like a yearling. And within 10 seconds, a fisher came by trailing that deer. It was obvious it was on the scent of that deer. I've never seen that before, or I just thought I'd share that if anybody else had ever seen it. I have heard of fisher taking fawns from reliable sources. That has been witnessed. I've not seen that, but I've never seen a fisher trailing an adult deer like that before.
Hungry fisher. Yeah, I don't know if there's any documentation of fisher killing adult deer either. They do kill fawns. They absolutely do kill fawns.
Yeah.
Can't probably change his mind. I get a little closer.
Yeah. Oh, big male fishers here.
Any other questions?
Nick, are there any known deer yards that you take a look at each year?
We don't do that anymore. In my, we haven't done it in my tenure, but even back when I was a seasonal department in the early 2000s, that was something we only did then after hard winters, severe winters, to try to get a better sense of what mortality might have been. And it turned out it was so variable that it was not useful information. You could go in one yard and find, tons of deer, and you go in the next one 10 miles away and find almost nothing. So it turned out it was never really useful information, but.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, could I ask that the slide that is showing now, which is archery season and number of antlerless permits, if our presenter would send me that slide, I would like to send it on to someone.
Sure, yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, it'll be included in the minutes anyway, as part of it. Okay. Leave this up if that helps you.
This is your proposal to us, get the same dates around the seasons. And those details for each season, which haven't changed, and then a total handles permits of 28,300 allocated by those lot operations.
One more question. At the public hearings, there's a lot of talk about moving the youth season back, moving it forward to where it used to be. Remind me that can't happen until rule changing next.
That requires a rule change.
Got it.
Fortunately.
Okay, I'll have a couple questions about our reviewing the rules and the timing of the next steps, but that's different than this. Do I have a motion then for anybody to accept this proposal?
Make the motion to accept the agenda.
Second. We have a motion and a second to accept the proposal by the departments for 28,300 ambulance permits. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Ayes have it. Okay, thank you, Nick. So moving on, as we move past this coming season and into reviewing the rules for the deer rules. Can you remind us again the schedule of that? You'll be gathering all the data from this coming season. And then we'll be reviewing the data and making changes, reviewing your recommendations and getting feedback from all of us. And then we will move forward, eventually have new rules. And those rules would be available for the 2026 season or 25 season.
Most likely the 26th season. So yeah, so my hope, and I mean, this hasn't been decided yet, of course it matters. Well, it doesn't matter what capacity the board exists at that point, but my hope for a timeline would be, I'm going to do a lot of analyses this summer, get a lot of stuff ready to go. I'd like to obviously roll next fall's harvest data into that as much as we can, but then to basically make a recommendation to the board in January or February and start that rulemaking process. The hope there being we could have everything done ideally by maybe July, probably August, which gets it into the Law Digest on time for the 26 season. If we really wanted to, I mean, I guess we could probably have something take effect on passage. You know, most of the things we're going to be considering, I think, are going to be expansions of opportunity. So they don't necessarily need to be in the Law Digest, but that would be the ideal, of course, right? Whatever is going to be the season and the things would be in the Law Digest. So that would be most likely take effect in 26.
Any other questions for Nick? At this point? Thank you, Nick.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, that concludes our agenda. Commissioner, you have an update for us or anything you want to share with us?
Yep, I gave you my update not so long ago when we were together. I'm not there tonight because I just got back from a meeting in Cape Cod, the North American NIAFWA meeting, the wildlife folks, my counterparts from around the Northeast. And one of the areas that we were talking a lot about, and John Austin, if he wants to add on, is landscape conservation. And the department's heavily involved in that. One of our staff members, Bob Zano, presented, very well received. That is where we're headed. You should be, we can give you an update on that. It doesn't, it does impact hunting, angling, and trapping in as much as it's preserving the habitats for all the wildlife in the state. And so we can give you a much more in-depth presentation at a different time. Other than that, 258, they're taking testimony still. I think some of you may have requested to go in and testify. And if you do, that's great. And we remain opposed to it as it's written. I think that's all I have. So thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anything you're gonna add, John, or anything?
Well,
since he brought
it up, I'm
happy to.
Oh, hold on, John. Dave, just quickly, go ahead.
Yeah, just a question. Commissioner, could you expand on that statement, remain opposed to it as written? What elements do you remain opposed to? I just shared an email, I believe, with.
Well,
board member.
it's a really long discussion, and I think if you look at John and my testimony, it's pretty explicit. Our concerns have to do with the board and the rationale of changing the board. That meaning the Fish and Wildlife Board generally follows recommendations of the scientists from the department. And that was even acknowledged by one of the legislators. He also acknowledged, and if you go back and listen, he stated that he did agree that the department did a very good job listening to many voices aside from hunters and anglers. So the question I posed back is, then what are we doing? What's the problem we're trying to fix? And at that point, the chair of the committee said she didn't want to have a debate, and that's her prerogative, and we moved on. We oppose the ban on hound hunting coyotes, and the rationale is we just spent, and I say we, meaning you all, and the department spent hours and hours and hours. We had a number of voices part of that, and we instituted a new rule, and that rule went into effect on January 1st, and the season ended, and we had no landowner hunter conflicts, not one. And that was the intent of that bill. And so I'm perplexed. In one session, they asked us to put rules together to accomplish something. We accomplish it, and now they want to ban it. And so I'm frustrated by that. I think, as are a number of folks who participate in that activity. They policed themselves very well because they also heard the concerns. And I'll just add that while it's an ongoing case, we did win a ruling in our favor regarding an injunction on the season. And I would suggest you read the actual ruling, because I'm not going to try to quote it because I don't want to be accused of misquoting it. But the judge is very clear about why he ruled in our favor. So we're opposed to that as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for the commissioner? We have his attention. Yeah, you're off the hook, Commissioner.
Well, and feel free to give me a call. Anyone, you have my number, you have my email. I know a lot of you have called me. Feel free to give me a call if you have ideas, suggestions, so on and so forth. Thank you for your time.
Jay Sweeney.
I just want to say thanks to the commissioner, Nick, all the hard work you guys do constantly that isn't appreciated by the folks that are trying to fight us tooth and nail at every turn. So I'm really hoping that the legislature does the right thing, because I think it'll be just devastating if they don't. But know that everything you do is appreciated by a lot of people. I get comments continually from people thanking us for the work that the department does and the board does, and really hoping to see that this doesn't happen. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Hey, John, you're going to share something with us here quickly?
Well, the commissioner teed up the topic of landscape scale conservation. Okay, so I'll reflect a little on what he was referring to from the Northeast Fish and Wildlife Conference. Has been engaged in over the years. Is first of all, landscape scale conservation is this concept of looking at conservation in all of its forms at a really large scale. So our department, in concert with lots of partner organizations like Department of Forest Parks and Recreation, Agency of Agriculture, Department of Environmental Conservation, the Nature Conservancy, the Trust for Public Land, Natural Resources Council, the list goes on and on. Lots of partner organizations work together to understand the ecologically functional and connected landscape of a region. In our case, our focus has been on the Northern Appalachian ecoregion. So we have been working with New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, the provinces of Quebec, Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, Labrador, to map out the connected landscape of that region and then figure out how do we partner together to make sure that we're conserving the right. We make investments in land conservation, we work with land use planning organizations, and we make decisions about how we manage land, thinking about it not just at the state scale, the regional scale, the local scale, even the landowner scale, but at that larger regional scale. To make sure that, moose are able to move around, woodland caribou are able to move around, bears are able to move around, and wood turtles are able to move around, and all of the processes that affect them. So it's working with scientists to understand to the extent that we can how that ecologically functional landscape fits together. Our understanding is constantly evolving. And then just thinking critically about how we use that information in our day-to-day decision making. So it has implications to all of the stuff that Nick presented tonight because it gets at forest health and how deer are able to successfully thrive on the landscape, in addition to how black bears are able to move from north to south through the Green Mountains, in addition to getting up to the Gaspe Peninsula. It has a big implication to the health of our moose population. So it's just thinking about conservation in all its forms at a really large scale and how Vermont fits into that. And there was a lot of conversation about that at the conference that the commissioner was just at. There's actually, might be interested to know, there's a summit of sorts that's planned for early June in Montreal, Canada. And Commissioner Herrick and our agency secretary, Julie Moore, myself will be in attendance. And we're hoping to get leaders from all of the other surrounding Northeast provinces and states to refocus leadership attention on coming up with some sort of a durable framework to ensure region-wide coordination on sort of larger conservation issues and interests. Pretty exciting opportunity. I say refocus because in 2016, our department and our colleagues in Quebec sponsored through the New England Governors Eastern Canadian Premiers Association a resolution. This was a resolution signed by all the governors and premiers at that time, that basically is a policy statement that said, we want all of the state and provincial natural resource and transportation agencies and land use planning organizations to work together to figure out what is this connected landscape of the region and how are we going to maintain it into the future. And they created a working group to put together a plan, figure out how to put into action the terms of that policy statement. The working group kind of came to a conclusion right around the time that COVID hit, and the Premiers Association lost the steam. They've been in effect for over 50 years, but COVID kind of put a damper on all of that. So they've been taking time to remotivate around things like that. So things are coming back together again in the summit in Quebec will be opportunity to get some of the leadership of the region refocused on this topic.
Great, thank you. Interesting stuff. Commissioner, you were still this, Commissioner? I just have one comment. It's more looking forward to a future meeting. John just mentioned black bears. I don't know if there's any way that Jackie is going, or if she plans on updating that
Hey,
presentation that she-
Lucy. Shh, shh.
Lucy. Jackie Como gave us an excellent presentation last year on the bear population. I don't know if she's updating that presentation or is going to have the ability to update that and present something to the board later on this summer, basically based on, last year's bear season activity, the winter, and what kind of impact the mild winters will have on the bear population as well.
If
she
the board
does-
wants, a presentation, we will make it happen, Mr. Chair.
I think it would be great to have to.
Yep.
To
I'll
get
work
that.
I'll work out the details with you and and John and David Sosville, and we'll get that squared away. That's a great suggestion.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Any
now
other
she stops
questions?
barking.
Okay, if nothing else, a motion to adjourn. Motion in a second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
I
I.
Aye.
Ayes have it. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.